In the past couple of months, there have been many developments in my favorite GSC tier, GSC UU. Let's go and have a look at them. To begin with, how has the actual metagame developed and evolved? Just like in GSC OU, a lot of the recent trends were represented in the new viability rankings. The highest ranked Pokémon remains Qwilfish, UU's only viable spikes user. Despite this, Qwilfish's top ranking was far from ubiquitous. Beyond people simply ranking other Pokémon higher, there has been a consensus that spikes, and by extension Qwilfish, aren't as necessary anymore. Not having to use the mediocre Qwilfish has several benefits in the team builder, and spikes are not necessary for every UU strategy. Despite this, Qwilfish is still the most used Pokémon in UU. It was used on over 70% of teams in UUPL. One problem Qwilfish faces is that Blastoise is more popular than ever. Blastoise is the only common rapid spinner in this tier. This means that there are less games where you set up spikes and they just stay up for good. Recently, Blastoise has begun using more offensive sets. With Earthquake, it puts much more pressure on Qwilfish, as well as the spin blocking Haunter. It also chunks electric types. Zap Cannon, in addition to Paralysis, destroys Qwilfish and Gyarados and threatens Slowbro, though its accuracy means it's unreliable. This offensive set has made Blastoise even better. Blastoise is now showing up more on offensive teams, in addition to being a staple on most defensive ones. Some people have even used Earthquake on the traditional Rest plus Sleep Talk sets. Blastoise's popularity has contributed to the fall of some offensive Pokémon. Nidoqueen and Gyarados, who both heavily rely on spikes, hate how popular Blastoise is. Nidoqueen is also checked nicely by Blastoise. In general, more offensive builds have drifted away from Nidoqueen. Nevertheless, Nidoqueen does remain a great Pokémon. Nothing can replicate what it does, both offensively and defensively. Gyarados suffered a larger fall. As a mixed attacker, it can feel unreliable due to power issues, Hydro Pump and Thunder accuracy, and its electric weakness. On offensive teams, Slowbro is often taking Gyarados' team slot due to its utility, namely its matchup versus physical attackers like Ranbull. Quagsire has ascended up the viability rankings, now landing in 7th place. Rest plus Sleep Talk Quagsire finds itself on many teams due to its roll compression in what it beats. This set does anchor a lot of slower pace spikes using teams. Also, Belly Drum Quagsire has shown up more on offensive styles, in particular hyper offensive builds without spikes. These teams try spam Paralysis and set up the right situation for Quagsire to sweep. It uses Protect Last on these teams, both for leftovers recovery and explosion dodging. I do not know if Quagsire will remain this high forever, given the several ways it can be punished, but it remains a big part of the metagame. Another declining offensive staple would be Hypno. Hypno often faces the choice between actually checking the likes of Hunter with a stab set or being an actual threat itself with Curse. The Curse set is not as good as it once was though, due to both competition and an increased knowledge of how to beat it. Hypno has often felt like a necessary evil. As a Pokémon, it can be passive and quite easily abused, but offensive teams often needed to run it for specific threats. Players have dropped Hypno more. Offensive teams can either try different checks to the Pokémon that Hypno beats, or they go in a direction where you don't need to be so defensively secure if you just got raw power. Outside of offensive teams, Hypno is often outclassed and there's not much of a reason to use it. One Pokémon who can outclass Hypno is Chansey. Chansey rose a whopping 11 spots on the VR update. This can be attributed to the rise of Curse Chansey, as well as more experimentation in general. Curse Chansey is a surprisingly threatening setup sweeper, one who can still perform much of Chansey's defensive duties. Counter is the usual last move on Curse Chansey, but we've also seen Iron Tail used for the defense drops and coverage on Haunter and Aerodactyl. Chansey's ability to just wall so many special attackers is invaluable. One Pokemon annoying for Chansey though is Gligar. While Gligar didn't move at all in the VR update, it has been more appreciated as of late. The defensive utility that it provides is both valuable and unique. It can answer Nidoqueen without Ice Beam, Belly Drum Quagsire, Curse Chansey, Sandslash, Scyther, and more. Its immunity to spikes is invaluable in this regard. It's also quite annoying itself, between Screech, decently strong Earthquakes, and Thief. On Spike's teams, Gligar does a lot of good, and I expect it to become more popular in the future. It's now time for more of a lightning round. Girafarig did not move at all in the VR update, but it has been more popular in the last year. Its Curse and Mix sets are quite threatening, though they can struggle with power issues and fragility. It competes heavily with Granbull as a Curse Sweeper. Sandslash has seen a bit more use. People have become better at making use out of it. Swords Dance Sandslash is a fierce Pokemon when used right. Unlike other SD Pokemon, namely Scyther and Pinsir, Sandslash easily beats Aerodactyl. The increased prominence of Blastoise and Quagsire has benefited Victreebel. It can set up all over Blastoise and destroy Quagsire with a Razor Leaf. Many Quagsire teams have an iffy matchup versus Victreebel. In fact, some slower paced Belly Drum Quagsire teams can be destroyed by Victreebel on the spot. Speaking of grass types, Blossom has seemed a bit more popular. Its Swords Dance set can be pretty strong, and it does a lot of nice things defensively. Muck and Electrode have declined. The hyper-offensive teams that they would have once defined don't use them as much anymore. Outside of these playstyles, the two of them do not have much to do, especially Electrode. Muck's playstyle just does not mesh well with UU's metagame. Finally, the UUVR had a brand new addition. Porygon, who used to not be ranked, is now ranked with former staples like Omastar. Despite low stats, the combination of Curse, Thunderwave, Recover, and Stab Double Edge is strong enough to give it a niche. It's good enough at forcing paralysis, since ground types are not safe switch-ins to it. If normal resistant Pokemon are gone, then Porygon can be a game ender. Even when faced with something like Haunter or Magneton though, it just paralyzes them. This paralysis is then abused by Pokemon like Granbull. Overall, it can be a nice Pokemon and spikeless teams that like to abuse paralysis. As mentioned, offensive teams have changed directions in some ways. There are more directions to go in nowadays. You can run paralysis spam spikeless teams, or teams that make use of more niche setup sweepers. More balanced team styles, like say the usual Piloswine Ampharos builds, remain mostly the same. Defensive builds also remain the same in several ways. You run a solid defensive core and try win the game with one big sweeper, whether it's Belly Drum Quagsire or Curse Granbull. That is much of what's been going on in 2026 GSC UU. If you want any further information, check my post on the viability rankings. Now, what recent tournaments have been held? For the most part, all the usual ones. There was one tournament though, unlike any other before it. One tournament being hosted for the very first time. I present to you GSC UUPL. Not UUPL or GSCPL, GSC UUPL. This was a team tournament hosted a few months ago. The selection of tiers to play were a bold, varied selection. Slot 1, GSC UU. Slot 2, GSC UU. Slot 3, GSC UU. Slot 4, GSC UU with Venusaur. That is right. GSC UUPL decided to test out Pokemon currently banned from GSC UU. In addition to Venusaur, there were slots testing Typhlosion and Smeargle, as well as a slot that tested all three. There was also a slot that tested every UUBL Pokemon, basically a UUBL metagame. Finally, in the final grand finale match of the tour, there was one more slot. GSC UU with a Lugia. Truly terrifying stuff. Let's move back a bit though. Why are Venusaur, Typhlosion and Smeargle specifically being tested? Well, last December, yours truly made a thread in Smogon's policy form. In that thread, I argued for the unbanning of these 3 UUBL Pokémon. My reasoning? They are not broken in GSC UU. In fact, none of them are top threats. Venusaur's typing is not great in UU's metagame, and it lacks access to several key moves. Its passive competes with other grass types and is not easy to fit onto teams. Typhlosion is strong, but is severely limited by its defensive profile. It struggles to fit all key coverage moves, and no matter what it runs, it remains checked by staples such as Blastoise and Aerodactyl. Smeargle's great move pool is undercut by its awful stats. As a spikes user, Qwilfish is generally better due to its much better longevity and being an actual decent Pokemon. It's much better at keeping spikes up versus the ever common Blastoise. None of these Pokemon are broken in UU. If they fit perfectly fine into UU, then why should they remain in UUBL? That was the crux of my thread's argument. You can drop all 3 into UU and the metagame will not drastically change. It may not even change much at all. In fact, it could benefit the tier. Venusaur gives the tier another check to certain Pokemon and strategies. Typhlosion provides another skill-based wall breaker, and Smeargle lowers the necessity of Qwilfish, in addition to being a good tempo setter. Another benefit of these drops is making UUBL smaller. People have always complained about how big that list is. With all of that said, what was the reception to my thread and the UUBL tests? For the most part, quite positive. First off, people are much less enthusiastic about Smeargle. One thing you gotta consider with Smeargle is that it can use Baton Pass. Baton Pass Smeargle may end up too strong for GSC UU. As such, you probably need to ban Baton Pass when you unban Smeargle. People generally don't think that that's a good trade, and combined with other concerns over Smeargle like a Trapper set, then yeah, people tend to favour dropping the other 2 Pokemon. Venusaur and Typhlosion have been as good as I expected them to be. Venusaur does some nice things, but it has several flaws. The reception towards dropping it has been probably the most positive. Typhlosion, frankly, has been less good than I thought it would be. It is really hard to get good use out of it. Oftentimes, you are better off using a different offensive Pokemon, like Electabuzz. After the GSC UU tests ended, UUFPL decided to test both Venusaur and Typhlosion. That tournament is still going on, so there still is more to see. All in all, I do expect Venusaur and Typhlosion to at least be voted on, hopefully in the next year. After one more big tournament testing them, I'd say we are good to hold the vote. With both exciting new developments and tiering shifts, it's a nice time to be around this metagame. As I said in my OU Trends video, who knows what the future holds? How will GSC UU change in the coming years? Only time will tell.